They wanted me to enter through the back door of my own wedding. His family called me the help when I wore my engagement ring. But when that cathedral door opened and I stepped into the light wearing my grandmother's diamonds, I didn't just walk down that aisle, I owned it. Before we get into this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you won't believe what happens next. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turned their whispers into my victory. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in September in a little coffee shop in Brooklyn that I'd been going to for 3 years. I was a freelance graphic designer working on a logo for a small business owner who wanted something fresh and modern. I had my laptop out, my iced coffee half empty, and I was in that zone where the whole world just fades away and it's just you and your work. Then someone bumped my table. Coffee went everywhere. My laptop screen got splashed, and I jumped up so fast my chair fell backward. I was ready to unleash every frustration I'd been holding in from that week. But when I looked up, there was this man with the most genuinely horrified expression on his face, already grabbing napkins, apologizing like his life depended on it. "I am so sorry. Please, let me replace your coffee and your laptop. Please tell me it's okay. I'll pay for any damage, I swear." His name was Brandon, and the way he looked at me when I laughed instead of yelling, it was like he'd just witnessed a miracle. We ended up talking for 2 hours. He told me he worked in tech, building software for small businesses. I told him about my dreams of opening my own design studio one day. He didn't mention money. He didn't mention status. He was just real. We started dating, and it was the kind of romance you see in movies, but never think happens in real life. Late-night conversations that stretched until sunrise. Weekend adventures to places neither of us had been before. He'd show up at my apartment with takeout from the Thai place I loved, and we'd eat straight from the containers while watching old movies. 3 months in, he took me to the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset and got down on one knee. The ring wasn't the biggest I'd ever seen, but it was thoughtful, a vintage piece with emeralds, because he remembered I'd mentioned once that they were my favorite. I said yes before he even finished asking. That's when he told me something he'd been holding back. His family wasn't just comfortable, they were wealthy. Like old money, country club, vacation homes in 3 countries, kind of wealthy. He'd been nervous to tell me because he wanted me to love him for him, not for what his family had. And I did. I loved the man who spent Saturday mornings with me at flea markets and made terrible pancakes and laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. But then I met his family and everything changed. The first meeting was at their country club, this sprawling place with crystal chandeliers and people in tennis whites who looked like they'd never broken a sweat in their lives. His mother, Catherine, was wearing pearls at 2 in the afternoon. His sister, Whitney, had that kind of polished look that takes a team of professionals to achieve. And his father, Thomas, had a handshake that felt like a test I was already failing. Catherine smiled at me, but it never reached her eyes. "Oh, Brandon, she's so striking," she said, like she was commenting on an unusual piece of art she wasn't sure she liked. Whitney looked me up and down and said, "I love how confident you must be to wear your hair like that." My hair was in braids, beautiful braids that had taken 6 hours and cost me $200. The way she said it made it sound like I'd shown up in a costume. Then the server came by to take our drink order, and without even looking at me properly, she asked if I was there to assist with the event setup. The words hit me like cold water. Brandon corrected her immediately, his jaw tight. "This is my fiancé." The server went pale and apologized profusely. But I caught the look Catherine and Whitney exchanged. It was quick, just a flicker, but it said everything. It said, "See, this is what we were worried about." Lunch was 2 hours of polite interrogation, disguised as conversation. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? Where did I go to college? Every answer I gave felt like it was being weighed and measured and found wanting. Thomas asked what I did for work, and when I said I was a graphic designer, he chuckled and said, "Oh, how nice. A hobby that makes money." Like my career, the thing I'd built from scratch and poured my heart into was some cute little side project to keep me busy. Brandon kept trying to steer the conversation, kept trying to show them who I really was, my sense of humor, my intelligence, my passion for my work. But they weren't interested in knowing me. They were interested in cataloging all the ways I didn't fit into their world. By the time we left, I felt exhausted, like I'd just run a marathon while carrying weights. Brandon apologized the whole drive home, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved me, but he also loved his family. And he couldn't understand yet that sometimes love means choosing. The engagement party was worse. It was at their family estate, and Catherine had planned the whole thing without asking for any input from me. When I arrived, I realized I was one of maybe 5 black people there, and 3 of them were serving staff. The others were Brandon's childhood friend and his wife, who gave me sympathetic looks all night like they knew exactly what I was walking into. People kept approaching me with that same curious, slightly condescending tone. "So how did you two meet?" they'd ask. And when I'd tell them about the coffee shop, they'd laugh like it was the most charming little story, as if our relationship was entertainment for them. One woman actually said, "Brandon's always been so adventurous with his choices." Adventurous, like I was a vacation destination, not a person he wanted to build a life with. But the worst moment came when I overheard Catherine talking to one of her friends in the hallway. I'd gone to find the bathroom, and their voices carried through the open door of the study. "It's just a phase," Catherine was saying. "Brandon's always been drawn to causes, and she's very different from what he's used to. Once the novelty wears off, he'll come to his senses. We just need to be patient." I stood there frozen, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. I wasn't a person to her. I was a phase, a cause, something exotic and temporary that her son would eventually grow tired of. I went back to the party, smiled through the rest of the evening, and said nothing. But that night, alone in my apartment, I cried until my head ached. I called my best friend, told her everything, and she said the words I needed to hear. "The question isn't whether his family accepts you. The question is whether Brandon will choose you over their approval. Because if he won't, girl, you need to walk away now before this gets worse." The wedding planning started 2 weeks later, and that's when things really fell apart. Catherine took over everything, and I mean everything. She hired a wedding planner without consulting me, chose a venue before I could even visit it, picked out floral arrangements and color schemes that looked nothing like what I'd envisioned. When I tried to have a conversation about it, she'd smile and say things like, "Trust me, darling. I've been to hundreds of weddings. I know what works." I wanted to include some of my family's traditions. The jumping of the broom, a particular prayer my grandmother had said at every wedding in our family for 3 generations. When I mentioned it to Catherine, she actually patted my hand like I was a child who'd suggested something silly. "Let's keep things classic, shall we?" she said. "We don't want the wedding to feel too themed. This is going to be covered by society magazines. We need to think about how it will photograph, themed, like my culture was a party decoration, like the traditions that had sustained my family through slavery and segregation, and every hardship imaginable were just aesthetic choices that might not photograph well." Brandon tried to intervene, but he was caught in the middle, and honestly, he wasn't fighting hard enough. He'd say things like, "Maybe we can compromise," or "Let's just keep the peace for now." But there was no compromising with people who fundamentally didn't respect me. There was no peace in erasing myself to make them comfortable. Then came the dress appointment, and that's when I realized just how much they wanted me to disappear. Catherine had made the appointment with her friend, some big-name designer whose work had been featured in every bridal magazine you could imagine. I walked into that pristine white boutique, actually feeling hopeful. Maybe this was where things would turn around. Maybe Catherine wanted to bond over this, mother-in-law and bride, the way it's supposed to be. The designer brought out dress after dress, and every single one looked like it belonged in a different era. High necklines that went up to my chin, long sleeves that covered every inch of my arms, silhouettes that were shapeless and safe, and completely devoid of personality. Nothing that showed any joy or celebration, or the excitement a bride should feel. Everything was designed to make me look smaller, quieter, less noticeable. "We want you to look elegant," Catherine said, sipping champagne, while I stood on a platform feeling like a paper doll, being dressed by someone who didn't like me. "Refined, sophisticated, you understand. Brandon's family has a certain image to maintain, and the wedding photos will be everywhere. We need to be thoughtful about presentation." Whitney was there too, offering her commentary. "These are the kinds of dresses that photograph well," she said, scrolling through her phone, probably looking at Pinterest boards of acceptable white brides. "You want to look timeless, not trendy. Classic, not flashy." What they meant, what they were really saying without saying it directly, was, "We want you to look as white as possible. We want you to blend in, be quiet, take up less space. We want people to look at the wedding photos, and maybe if you're covered up enough, if you're modest enough, if you're invisible enough, they might forget for a moment that you're black." I stood there in a dress that felt like a prison, heavy fabric weighing me down, and I wanted to cry. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. I thanked them politely, said I needed to think about it, and left that boutique feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. That night, I sat in my apartment and stared at my engagement ring for a long time. I loved Brandon, I really did, but was love enough when it came with the price tag of erasing myself? Was love enough when his family saw me as something to be managed, minimized, and eventually dismissed? I called my grandmother, and just hearing her voice made the tears come. She's 83 years old, and she's always been my rock. The woman who raised my mother to be strong, and raised me to be even stronger. I told her everything: the lunch, the party, the overheard conversation, the dress appointment. I told her I was thinking about calling off the wedding. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Baby, let me ask you something. Do you love this man?" I said yes, my voice shaking. She said, "And does he love all of you? Not the version his family wants you to be, but all of you. Your blackness, your culture, your voice, your fire? Does he love all of that?" I thought about Brandon, really thought about him. The way he'd kiss my forehead when I was stressed about a project. The way he'd ask about my day and actually listen. The way he'd shown up to my cousin's cookout and eaten 3 plates of food and played spades until midnight, even though he didn't really know how. The way he'd defended me to that server at the country club. The flash of anger in his eyes that someone would disrespect me. "Yes," I said. "He does love all of me. He's never had to fight his family before. He doesn't know how." My grandmother made a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. "Then it's time he learned. Baby, you walk into that wedding looking like exactly who you are. You walk in there so beautiful, so powerful, so undeniably yourself that they have no choice but to see you. Not the version they want, but the real you. I'm coming to visit you this weekend, and I'm bringing something special." When my grandmother arrived that Saturday, she was carrying a garment bag I'd never seen before. She laid it on my bed carefully, reverently, and when she unzipped it, I gasped. Inside was her wedding dress from 1965, the dress she'd worn when she married my grandfather in a small church in Alabama. It was beautiful, delicate lace, intricate beadwork, a silhouette that was both modest and stunning. But it was also dated, clearly from another era. "Now, before you say anything," she said, seeing my expression, "I know it needs updating, but this dress has history, baby. I wore it when I married the love of my life, in a time when people didn't want us to be together either. Your grandfather was dark-skinned, and my family thought I should marry someone lighter. But I loved him, and I wore this dress, and I walked down that aisle with my head high. This dress is about choosing love and choosing yourself at the same time. So we're going to update it. We're going to make it yours, and you're going to walk down that aisle like the queen you are." We found a seamstress who specialized in cultural designs, a Black woman who understood exactly what we were trying to do. Together, the three of us transformed that dress. We kept the original elegance, the classic lines that made it timeless, but we added details inspired by our heritage, subtle patterns in the beadwork that echoed African textiles, a slight change to the silhouette that felt both classic and modern. A train that moved like water when I walked. The result was breathtaking. It was everything I was, rooted in history, but completely my own. Traditional but revolutionary. Respectful but unapologetic. When I tried it on for the first time with all the alterations complete, I cried. Not sad tears, but tears of recognition. I looked in the mirror and saw myself. Not the muted version Catherine wanted. Not the invisible bride they were trying to create, but me. Fully, completely, beautifully me. But 2 weeks before the wedding, the final insult came. The wedding coordinator Catherine had hired, a woman named Bethany, who'd been copying Catherine on every email and excluding me from half the decisions, called me for what she described as a quick chat about logistics. "I wanted to discuss your entrance," she said, in that sweet, passive-aggressive tone that probably worked on people who didn't recognize it for what it was. Given the layout of the cathedral and the number of guests, I think it might be wise to consider entering through the side entrance rather than the main doors. It's more discreet, you see. Less attention on the entrance itself, more focus on the ceremony. Some brides prefer it because it feels more intimate. I sat there on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, and something inside me just snapped. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, my voice calm but cold. "You want me to enter my own wedding through a side door? Well, it's not about wanting. It's just a suggestion based on, you want me to sneak into my own wedding like I'm something to be ashamed of, like I'm the help, like I don't deserve to walk through the front door of that cathedral." That's not what I meant at all. I hung up. I actually hung up on her, something I'd never done to anyone in my life. And then I sat there in silence for 20 minutes, staring at my engagement ring, feeling something shift inside me. I'd been trying so hard to be understanding, to be patient, to give them time to adjust. But they didn't want time. They wanted me gone. I called Brandon. "I can't do this," I told him, my voice steady despite the tears running down my face. "I can't marry into a family that wants me to be invisible. I can't spend the rest of my life shrinking myself to fit into their small idea of who I should be. I love you, Brandon. I really do. But I love myself more." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard him say, "I'm coming over. Don't go anywhere, please." Brandon showed up at my door 30 minutes later. His eyes were red, and he looked like he'd been crying the whole drive over. He came inside, sat down across from me, and said, "Tell me everything. Tell me every single thing my family has done to make you feel this way." So I did. I told him about his mother calling me a phase. I told him about the dress appointment and what those dresses really meant. I told him about the coordinator suggesting I use the side entrance. I told him about every microaggression, every backhanded compliment, every moment where I'd felt like an outsider trying to break into a club that would never want me as a member. He listened to all of it, and I watched his face change as he realized the full extent of what I'd been enduring. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been blind. I've been asking you to be patient with them, to give them time, to help them adjust, but they don't deserve your patience. They don't deserve your grace. You deserve better. We're doing this wedding your way, or we're not doing it at all. And tomorrow, I'm having a conversation with my family that's about 3 years overdue. Brandon, I don't want you to blow up your family for me. They're the ones who created this situation," he said, taking my hands. "I love you, all of you. And if they can't see how lucky I am, how incredible you are, then that's their loss. But I won't let them treat you like this anymore. I should have stopped it the first time it happened. I'm stopping it now. I don't know exactly what Brandon said to his parents the next day, but I know it involved ultimatums and raised voices and the words, accept her or lose me. When he came back to my apartment that evening, he looked exhausted, but somehow lighter. They're not happy, he said, but they know I'm serious. The wedding goes how we want it, or there is no wedding. Your dress, your entrance, your traditions, all of it. I told them if they can't respect you, they don't have to come. And I meant it. What did they say? My mom cried. My dad got angry. Whitney actually surprised me. She said she'd talk to mom. But the bottom line is this: I chose you. I will always choose you. And they need to figure out how to live with that. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m., wide awake with nerves. Not nerves about marrying Brandon. I'd never been more sure of anything. But nerves about walking into that cathedral full of people who didn't think I belonged there, who'd spent months trying to erase me, who were probably showing up just to see if I'd go through with it. My grandmother came into the room where I was getting ready. She'd been staying with me all week, and her presence had been the only thing keeping me grounded. She took my face in her hands, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "They're going to stare at you today. Let them. Let them look at you and see what real grace looks like. Let them see what it looks like when a woman knows her worth and refuses to apologize for it. You are not walking into that cathedral for them. You're walking in for you, for your ancestors, for every Black woman who was told she wasn't good enough. You wear that dress, you hold your head up, and you show them what they've been too blind to see. When I put on that dress, when my hairstylist finished with my natural curls, swept up in a style that was both regal and romantic, when my makeup artist stepped back and let me look in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked like the fullest version of myself I'd ever seen. I looked powerful. I looked like royalty. I looked like someone who had fought to be there and won. My bridesmaids, my sister, my two best friends from college, and Brandon's friend's wife, who'd become my ally, all started crying when they saw me. "Girl, you're about to break the internet," my best friend said. "Catherine is going to pass out when she sees you." The cathedral was packed when we arrived. Through the closed doors, I could hear the murmur of 300 guests, most of them from Brandon's world, all of them probably wondering what kind of spectacle this wedding would be. The original plan had been traditional classical music for my entrance, the kind of safe, predictable music that plays at every society wedding. We changed it. I'd hired a gospel choir, 10 voices strong. And when those doors opened, they were going to sing a song my grandmother had sung at church my whole childhood. The wedding coordinator, a different one because I'd fired Bethany, came over to tell me it was time. "Ready?" she asked, and I nodded. My father appeared beside me, looking sharp in his tuxedo, pride radiating from every pore. He'd worked as a postal worker his whole life, raised 4 kids, and never complained once. And now he was about to walk his daughter down the aisle of one of the most prestigious cathedrals in the city. "You look just like your mother did on our wedding day," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Beautiful, strong, ready to take on the world." The doors opened, and the gospel choir's voices filled that cathedral like nothing those walls had probably ever heard before. Rich, powerful, joyful voices, singing about love and faith and triumph. And then I stepped into the doorway, and the world seemed to stop. The silence that fell was instant and absolute. Every head turned, every eye fixed on me, and I saw it all. The shock, the awe, the sudden realization that I was not what they'd expected or wanted or hoped for. I was so much more. I saw Catherine in the front row, her face going slack with shock, her hand coming up to her pearl necklace like she was clutching it for support. I saw Whitney beside her, mouth literally falling open, her phone sliding forgotten in her lap. I saw Thomas, stiff and uncomfortable, but something else in his expression too. Maybe grudging respect, maybe just surprise that I'd had the audacity to show up like this. But I also saw so much more. I saw Brandon's aunt clutching her chest and mouthing the word beautiful. I saw several women in the congregation with tears already streaming down their faces. I saw people's expressions soften, saw smiles breaking through, saw something like wonder in their eyes. I saw phones coming out, not to mock or to gossip, but to capture something they knew was special, something they'd want to remember. And then I saw Brandon at the end of that aisle, and the look on his face made everything worth it. He was crying, full-on crying, not even trying to hide it. His hands were clasped in front of him like he was praying. And the way he was looking at me, like I was the answer to every question he'd ever had, like I was more than he'd ever dreamed possible. I started walking, my father's arm steady under my hand. And with every step, I felt something shift in that cathedral. This wasn't their wedding anymore. This wasn't a society event they got to control and critique and judge. This was ours, mine and Brandon's. And I was walking into it as myself, fully and completely, with all my history, and all my culture, and all my blackness on full display. The gospel choir kept singing, their voices rising and falling, and about halfway down the aisle, something amazing happened. People started clapping, not polite golf claps, but real applause. It started with Brandon's friend and his wife, then spread to others, scattered throughout the congregation, and soon it felt like half the cathedral was clapping along with the music, caught up in something bigger than their expectations or prejudices. I looked at every person who'd ever made me feel small. I smiled at them, not a challenging smile, not a vindictive one, just a smile that said, I'm here, I exist, deal with it. I smiled at Catherine until she had to look away. I smiled at Whitney until she smiled back, tentative and uncertain. I smiled at all of them because I was done shrinking to make them comfortable. When I reached the altar, Brandon reached for my hands and whispered, You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Thank you for not giving up on us. The ceremony was everything we'd wanted, and nothing his family had planned. Our pastor, a black man from my grandmother's church, spoke about love that transcends barriers and builds bridges. We included the traditions Catherine had tried to erase. My grandmother's prayer, spoken in a voice that carried the weight of generations, and the jumping of the broom that had sealed marriages in my family, since before any of us were free. My vows weren't the polite, generic things Catherine had suggested I keep them. They were real and raw and honest. Brandon, I said, my voice steady despite the tears, I stand here today as myself. Not a smaller version, not a quieter version, not the version your world might have wanted me to be, just me. And I promise to always show up as myself, to never apologize for who I am, and to build a life with you that honors both our stories, not just one. I promise to love you fiercely, to challenge you when you need it, and to stand beside you as an equal partner in everything. Today, I'm not just becoming your wife. I'm choosing to believe that love can be bigger than prejudice, stronger than tradition, and brave enough to change what needs changing. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. Even Thomas looked moved, though he'd probably never admit it. Brandon's vows matched mine in authenticity. He apologized, right there in front of everyone, for not protecting me better from prejudice and disrespect. He promised to spend every day making sure I felt cherished, seen, and celebrated. He promised that our children would grow up knowing that love isn't about fitting in. It's about being brave enough to stand out together. And he looked at his family when he said it, making sure they understood that this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about every day after. When we kissed, the cathedral erupted. Real joy, genuine celebration, and something that felt like collective relief. Like everyone had been holding their breath and could finally let it go. The reception was held at a beautiful venue, overlooking the water, and from the moment we walked in, something was different. People wanted to talk to me, not to interrogate me like at that first lunch, not to size me up or figure out how I'd tricked Brandon into proposing, but to actually know me. Brandon's college friends told me they'd never seen him happier. that he'd been different since meeting me, more confident, more himself. Business associates asked about my design work and handed me business cards. "We could use fresh creative perspective," one tech CEO said. "Send me your portfolio." Even some of his family members, the ones who'd been quiet during all the drama, came up to apologize. An uncle pulled me aside and said, "I should have said something before. The way you've been treated, it wasn't right. You handled it with more grace than anyone should have to." His wife hugged me and whispered, "You looked like a queen today." But the moment I'll never forget came during the toasts. After Brandon's best man spoke, and my sister gave a tearful speech about how happy I looked, I did something Catherine definitely hadn't approved of. I stood up, took the microphone, and walked to the center of the room. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I said, and the room went quiet. "Especially those of you who weren't sure you wanted to be here." You could hear the collective intake of breath, feel the shift in energy. Because here's what I've learned through this whole experience. When you show up as your authentic self, you give other people permission to do the same. Brandon and I aren't just joining two people today. We're building a bridge between two worlds. And bridges are strongest when they're built with honesty, respect, and love. So thank you for crossing it with us. Thank you for being willing to see something new, to expand your idea of what love looks like, to let your expectations be challenged. And to anyone here who's ever felt like they had to hide pieces of themselves to be accepted, I see you. You're enough, exactly as you are. The room exploded. People were on their feet, applauding, some crying, and in that moment, I caught Catherine's eye across the room. She was clapping too. It wasn't enthusiastic, it wasn't exactly warm, but it was real. It was acknowledgement. It was the beginning of something. Not acceptance maybe, but recognition. I existed. I mattered. I had taken up space in her son's life and in her family, and she couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. Later that night, as Brandon and I danced our first dance, he whispered, "You changed everything today. Not just for us, but for all of them. You showed them what they were missing." "I just showed up as myself," I said. "That's all I ever wanted to do." That wedding made waves beyond that cathedral and that reception. Photos went viral on social media within hours, not because of anything scandalous or dramatic, but because people saw something genuine in them. They saw a bride who looked powerful and joyful and completely herself. They saw a love that had fought for itself and won. I got messages from hundreds of women, Black women, brown women, Asian women, women from every background who'd been made to feel like they needed to minimize themselves to be loved. They said seeing me walk down that aisle in my full glory, wearing my culture with pride, gave them courage to do the same in their own lives. One message in particular stuck with me. It was from a young Black woman engaged to a white man from a wealthy family. "I've been letting his mother dictate everything about our wedding," she wrote. "I was going to straighten my hair, wear the dress she picked, keep quiet about wanting to include my family's traditions. But after seeing your photos and reading about your story, I realized I was about to erase myself before the marriage even started. Today I told my fiancé, we need to have a serious conversation about respect and boundaries. Thank you for showing me what's possible when you refuse to shrink." That's when I realized this story was bigger than just me and Brandon. It was about every person who's ever been told they're too much or not enough, too different or too unconventional. It was about refusing to let other people's limited imaginations define your worth. Catherine and I will probably never be close. We're cordial now, respectful even, but there's still a distance between us that might never fully close. And honestly, that's okay. I don't need her to love me the way she loves her son. I just need her to respect me, and she does now. She's learned that I'm not going anywhere, that her son chose me for reasons she might never fully understand. and that fighting it only pushes him further away. Whitney actually surprised me. About 6 months after the wedding, she called and asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no, but something in her voice made me agree. We met at that same coffee shop where Brandon and I first connected, and she apologized. A real apology. The kind where someone actually takes responsibility instead of making excuses. "I was threatened by you," she admitted. "You represented everything I'd been taught didn't belong in our world. You were confident and beautiful, and you didn't need our approval, and that scared me. I've spent my whole life trying to be what our parents wanted, trying to fit into this perfect image, and here you were, just being yourself, not caring what we thought. I took that as an attack when really, it was just you existing. We're not best friends now. We probably never will be. But we're family, and we're working on what that means." She's been making an effort, and I appreciate that. Brandon and I are coming up on our second anniversary now. We're still happy, still in love, still fighting every day to build a life that honors both of us. We have clear boundaries with his family now. Rules about respect, about how they speak to me and about me, about what we will and won't tolerate. And they've learned that if they want to be part of our life, they need to follow those rules. We're talking about having kids soon, and I think about what I'll tell them someday about their grandparents and this whole experience. I'll tell them the truth, that love is complicated, that families are messy, that sometimes people have to learn and grow and change. But I'll also tell them that you never ever make yourself smaller for anyone. Not for in-laws, not for society, not for anyone who tries to dim your light. That wedding taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life. You cannot shrink yourself to fit into someone else's small imagination of who you should be. You cannot twist yourself into shapes that don't fit just to make insecure people comfortable. You cannot apologize for taking up space when you have every right to be there. And when you love yourself enough to show up fully, unapologetically, completely as yourself, that's when you stop being a supporting character in someone else's story and become the star of your own. I walked down that aisle like a queen, not because I wanted to prove something to Catherine or Whitney or anyone else. I walked down that aisle like a queen because I finally understood that I was one, not because of who I was marrying or whose family I was joining, but because of who I've always been, because of the ancestors who survived impossible things so I could be here, because of the grandmother who taught me to stand tall, because of the culture and history and strength that runs through my veins. They wanted me to hide. I chose to shine. And that made all the difference. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below telling me about a time you refused to shrink for someone else. Tell me about the moment you chose yourself, even when it was hard. And listen, share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are enough, exactly as they are. Someone who's been making themselves smaller, quieter, less visible, to fit into spaces that should be making room for them instead. Subscribe for more real stories about real struggles and real victories. Hit that notification bell because next week, I'm sharing what happened when we announced we were having a baby and Catherine tried to suggest names. Girl, you won't believe it. Remember, you are not the problem. Their prejudice is. Their limited imagination is. Their inability to see your worth is their failure, not yours. You don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. You don't owe anyone silence when you deserve to sing. You don't owe anyone invisibility when you were born to shine.